Aloha and welcome to the Embodied Healing Self podcast with your host, Jen Mons. Each week, join me for soul-inspired, conscious conversations around embodied healing and awakening to your soul's purpose. Thank you for listening in. Alrighty, welcome back to this week's episode of the Embodied Healing Self. So how many of you have played the role of the good girl, the overachiever, kind of the shining star, the person that maybe everybody wanted to be, or the person that maybe in your family, your parents gave a lot of recognition to? Maybe you were a high achiever in elementary school, middle school, high school, your job, your career. Maybe you've been the person who's gotten a lot of attention for being that person who seems to do everything right. Is this you? Can you relate? Well, this show is for you. So we're going to talk about the shadow of your essential goodness. And how do I know? Because this is also me. So this has been coming up a lot in some sharing circles where we've been talking about how difficult it can be to really stand in our assertiveness from a healthy place and not a survivor strategy, not a wounded place. For some of us, it's easy to speak our truth when it's for real time to speak your truth because your life's on the line or something bad's really about to go down or because of maybe some childhood situation where you had to really speak up for yourself and it went really well. Maybe it's kept you safe out in the world that can sometimes, we believe, can be a really scary, uncertain place sometimes. Maybe there's a million different reasons why we are able to sometimes be super assertive and sometimes we aren't. And so where does this come from? Probably a pattern that started in our childhood. And it can be the pattern of being the dependable kid. Maybe you were the kid who got recognition and received love because you were a straight A student, or you were a star athlete, or because you were always doing everything right. Or maybe there was no reason. Maybe you were the favorite and you didn't know why. Now, I'm not saying I was the favorite. I'm not completely relating this whole entire story to me, but I'm noticing that there's a pattern or a trend where something happens where all of a sudden we become attached to our identity by the things that we do well and the things that we do right. And what that can do is it can keep us from staying aligned to our truth. It can keep us from speaking our truth. It can keep us in an unhealthy place of being overly compassionate, where compassion becomes enabling, because rather than speaking our truth to meet the person where they are and seeking to understand where they are, where we meet them and share where we are, we're just allowing them to just speak up. And this is enabling. And I'm going to invite you to notice that if this is you, if you really want to be seen and known and heard in your essential goodness, think about where this shows up in your life. Are you always trying to make everybody happy? Are you a people pleaser? Or do you completely reject the idea of making anybody happy? Because it can go one of two ways. Are you the nurturer? Are you the helper? Are you the person who volunteers way too much? Are you the person afraid to say what you really feel because you don't like conflict? How does conflict make you feel? Are there certain types of people in your life that are easier to stand up to than others? Is it easier for you to stand up to men or women? Is it easier for you to stand up to your children or your husband or your parents or your siblings or your friends, but not your coworkers or not your spouse or not your parents? Is it easier for you to speak about certain things but not others? There are a couple things that are really hard for most people to speak about: religion, politics, sex, and money, and maybe even health. All of those which we talk about on this show. Well, we haven't talked about politics yet. Today happens to be November 4th when I'm recording this, so right around the election day. All of these conversations are really triggering for people. For many of us, what we find is that we can start to make a lot of things about ourselves and our attachment to how people see us. So what do we do about this? We continue to seek to understand the other point of view. This is the only way through this. So rather than making other people wrong because we're we want to be in our essential goodness, which means we want to be right. We want people to see our point of view. Be curious about the person who's totally opposite from you and be willing to be wrong. Be willing to be the person in the room that's learning something, because in those moments, that's when we learn the most. Seek to understand how somebody could possibly think so differently than you if it's completely different or out of alignment with your morals and your values. But have a healthy boundary with discernment, not judgment, discernment. In order to do this, you have to be grounded in your own truth. You have to have clarity around your values, what you're a stand for, what you're not a stand for, what's important to you. Stand in your values. And from this place, then you can hold a conversation without taking things personally. Then you can realize that what's happening when somebody disagrees with you isn't really always about you, right? They're having their experience, you're having yours. Every relationship, every conversation, every exchange of energy, every co-creation, it's a two-part system. It's a reflection for the person on the other side as much as it is for you. So what the ego does is it makes us think that we're more important than we are by making everything about us and our need to be seen in our essential goodness. And what this keeps us from doing, what it can keep us from doing, is fully owning and stepping into our truth. So I know some of you are listening, and I know you're feeling this, and I want to invite you to consider, what does it say about you if you fully step into your truth and you speak it, you share it? What does it say about you? What's the fear? Maybe it's your, belief around women's rights or this election or God or food, anything. Right now, something that's kind of in your space that's uncomfortable. What does it say about you if you're seen in this? What does it say about you if you're not? And the way through this is really the way through everything, which is releasing attachment to all identities, to all roles, the attachment to your essential goodness, being willing to let go and let yourself be seen in your beliefs without wondering whether or not people are going to judge you. So my experience this year, I had, an uncomfortable situation, a relationship, a friendship that actually broke up. And it's not something that happens very often for me. I've never actually really been broken up with in my life. And I was a really good friend to this person. And I know she had personal stuff she was going through. But what I learned from it was, although I felt really good in staying in my truth and what was aligned for me, what I didn't do was express things from an assertive point of view. And so by allowing this person to have a conversation that dominated our conversations. Now, I was using the NVC tools and expressing emotions and needs, but by allowing a person who has a dominating personality to continue to dominate without stepping in and being assertive, I'm allowing this person to continue this behavior. Because if they can do this behavior to somebody that was very important to them, then they're just going to keep doing it. And when I think about, so what was coming up for me around that? What was coming up is the shadow of it for me was a sense of pride, because I felt good about the way that I showed up because I didn't lose my shit. I didn't emotionally vomit things. I didn't blame. I didn't project. I didn't get angry. I went inward. I processed my emotions. It's taken me a lot of personal growth to get to that point because I used to really project outwardly. And now I see that the next layer of personal growth is actually being able to speak assertiveness and discernment from a place of my truth, not a place of acceptance of the situation. So there's kind of a balance there, because what happens again is that too much truth is harsh and too much compassion is enabling. And so we can become attached to our identity around our essential goodness and be worried about being accepted, worried about those core wounds of rejection, abandonment, judgment, and fear. So that's how that trigger and that pattern can show up again. So what's underneath the need to be seen in your essential goodness? That's the real question. Right? It's not like necessarily the need to like go out and do something bad, or maybe it is. Maybe you've never, whatever bad is, maybe you've never given yourself permission or freedom to just do whatever you want to do. Maybe you've been operating from a place of fear of being judged. So the opposite of that is if you have no fear of judgment, It's liberation, it's freedom. And it gives you the ability to speak your truth from a healthy place without shame, without guilt, without anger, without projection. Taking radical personal self-responsibility and owning your emotions and not making it personal. Not making it personal about that person, not making it personal about you, but just simply stating the facts, owning your emotions, your deeply rooted emotion, without projecting blame on another person and identifying the need underneath it. And for most of us who identify with the need to be seen in our essential goodness, it might come from either never being seen in our essential goodness, never being recognized, believing that we've never been seen or heard in our gifts, in our talents, or the opposite. It might come from believing that we're only seen and loved when we're good. So if you're still on here listening, if this is still hanging on for you, I invite you to consider which one of those two is you. Or is there something else? What do you believe? What are your beliefs around essential goodness? Do you believe that you are seen in that? Or do you believe people don't see you and how much you have to offer and how wonderful you are? It's like, for some reason, people just can't totally see you. Is it your family? Is it your friends? Is it the community? Is it, what's the belief there? Or do you believe that you are only loved and worthy when you are good? And then from there, asking yourself, what do I need? So immediately we might go to, I need to be seen. Okay, so what does that mean? What's underneath that? A lot of times what we need is connection or support. And what we find is that we give what we need. We then become the over nurturer. We then become overly supportive. We then start putting other people's needs in front of ours because we want to be seen in our goodness. So this is the shadow. I've witnessed it in myself. And although I can say that I am proud of how I show up, right? But that proudness, that pride, there's a shadow there. So even though it feels good for me to have a difficult conversation with somebody and still like the way that I show up, or you can have a difficult conversation with somebody and feel good about how you show up because you're not getting angry and emotional and projecting stuff onto people. Are you being true to yourself? Is there something that you need to say that needs to come out to this person? Or are you enabling them by not completely speaking your truth? This is pretty juicy here. What is that level of healthy discernment? What is that balance of trust and discernment in that moment? How do you recognize in a conversation with somebody when you feel uncomfortable, whether you're leaning out and it's uncomfortable because you're being triggered by something within you, or you're leaning out because you need a healthy boundary and this person is toxic and you don't want to be a part of this conversation? Or are you able to just stand there and just be present and just check in with your body without getting too attached either way to whether something is right or wrong, to whether you're being seen or heard at all, period. Letting go of the attachment, the need. So I'd love to hear anything else that comes up for you around this, because I know that I'm not alone. I know that you're not alone. We talked about this in our group circles this week, so I know that it's a thing. And I just want to invite you to consider, what's really happening? Are you really feeling good about how you're showing up? Are you staying aligned with your truth? Are you doing the inner work, coming from a place of healthy discernment, coming from the healthy self? Or do you notice survivor strategies, patterns, core wounds coming up, repeating over and over again? Or are you finding yourself living in the flow and feeling really good about it? And if you are, then you know that you're in alignment in those relationships. If the pattern keeps repeating, it's probably an invitation to dive a little deeper. And if it's really, really deep, you may have some subconscious reprogramming that needs to happen. You may need support. You may need an energy healer. I've talked about a couple different modalities on the show, including the one that I use, which is divine healing, but there's Rohan, there's past life regression, there's hypnotherapy, there's Reiki, all kinds of different energy techniques that can really dive deeper into the subconscious. And so if you're feeling lost, confused, or frustrated, that might be a good place to start. You might be ready for something new. Thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you again on the show next week. Aloha. Hello, friends, and thank you so much for joining me today and being a part of this community. I know there are many other podcasts that you could be tuning into, and I am deeply honored that you chose to listen in and be present with me today. I love and cherish and appreciate you, and I want to invite you to join our tribe and Facebook group under jenmons.com/connect. I would also love to gift you your guide to discovering and overcoming the self-limiting beliefs standing in the way of you living in optimal health, more energy, fulfillment, and self-confidence to create an embodied, healthy, whole you. You can find this at jenmons.com/tribe. I also have one small request to help spread the love. In order for this podcast to show up in the feed of social media platforms of other like-minded people, we need reviews. So please head on over to jenmons.com/podcast to leave a review. You will also find other inspiring episodes on that page. So I personally read these reviews weekly and would love to give you a shout out and share your kind words with our listeners. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook as Jen Mons or The Holistic Coach with the W Holistic and Jen Mons, JenMons.com. Thank you so much and have an amazing day. Aloha.